I have discovered 2 new amazing fantasy books. But why review books with this background when I'm in the Faroe Islands? Let's change that, shall we? That's better. Let's start talking about one of the most anticipated releases of 2022, and that is the first binding by R.R. Virdi. I'll just say up front that this is definitely one of my favorite reads of the year so far, but it's definitely not a book for everyone. I actually really want to emphasize that some readers will hate this book, but I'll get to that later. But the first binding is the first book in a new series, and that series is being marketed as an Asian-inspired epic fantasy series similar to the Kingkiller Chronicle. And before you ask, no, I haven't read Kingkiller, so I actually have no idea if that's a fair comparison. And yes, I do plan on reading Kingkiller someday, but let's talk about the first binding. Firstly, it takes a while to get used to the prose in this book. It took me around 150 pages to get fully immersed in this story. However, I'm so glad I didn't give up on this book. Virdi has an astounding ability to write beautiful sentences, vivid scenes, and compelling characters. It took me nearly a month to finish this book, but that was only because I really wanted to savor every page of this story. So, this story follows Ari as he tells his life story to a singer named Eloine, and the story starts all the way back at Ari's childhood. I absolutely loved how Virdi set up the story. You have 2 main storylines, present and past, but within these 2 plot lines we also learn about beautiful and heartbreaking folklore stories and mythology. While most of the story focuses on telling Ari's past story and life leading up to this moment, the second plot line, which is the present plot line, still has a lot of tension. Ari is not an old man when he tells Eloine his story. Ari is still on a quest which adds another layer of tension to the present plotline. So you have a past plotline with tension and a present plotline with tension, and within both of these plotlines you get frequent stories about different gods and magic, and it's also beautifully interwoven. Consequently, the first binding has multiple chapters where you have a story within a story within a story, and each story is told with rich detail, tension, and riveting dialogue, which adds so much depth to the world. Although we don't get that much insight to the greater world, this world felt so rich and real since Virdi intently flashes out all the tales about the gods and the different supernatural beings. The magic system is also incredibly fascinating and rich with detail, and plays a significant role in the story. One of the reasons why this story worked so well for me is because it utilizes one of my favorite tropes. The first binding, at its core, is a coming-of-age underdog story with a found family, and later on this book we also get a pet companion trope and lots more. Consequently, this is an Asian-inspired fantasy, which is one of my favorite subgenres in fantasy. However, this book will not be everyone's cup of tea, and I want you to listen closely now. Virdi has a very unique writing style with many poems and beautiful sentences, and the pacing is incredibly slow. The first binding is arguably the slowest paced book I read this year, and I have already read 3 Robin Hobb books. The crazy part is that after finishing this 800-page tome, it almost felt like the story was just about to start. The pacing didn't bother me at all, because Virdi was able to get me fully immersed and invested in Ari's story and in this world. However, I could see readers either love or hate this book. Either this story will work incredibly well with you, or it won't. However, I would highly recommend giving the first pages a try before giving up on this story. I could go on and on and on about this story, but I'll end the first review by saying this. If you enjoy a slow-paced, character-driven story with beautiful prose, then this book will be for you. The first binding is a new favorite of mine, and I can't wait to read the next book. I'm giving this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. Alright, let's get on to the next book. Also, a special thanks to my patrons who support what I do here. I really appreciate it. On to the next book, The Heroes by Lord Grimdark, Joe Abercrombie. So, I've actually been quite scared to read this book for a long time. I'm a huge fan of the First Law books. I own the whole First Law universe in signed hardbacks, and I've met Joe Abercrombie twice, but prior to recording this video, I still hadn't read The Heroes, Red Country, and Sharp Ends, and I've kept postponing picking up those books. There is one specific reason why I kept postponing picking up The Heroes, and that is because I've been told that it's basically just a huge battle. And my least favorite part of fantasy is usually the battle and fight scenes, hence why I was worried. but oh boy, did Abercrombie deliver once again. I had expectations that I wouldn't enjoy this book, but this ended up becoming one of my favorite first law books. But let me just briefly say that it's highly recommended to read at least the first law trilogy before picking up this book. So go on and do that, you won't regret it. But while this book was very much centered around a huge battle, this book isn't actually that action focused. The heart of the story is really to show the different perspectives of fighting in a war. You have leaders and kings fighting for power, you have innocent men going to battle, and Abercrombie masterfully allows the reader to gain insights into the different power dynamics and experiences that people experience when they go to war. And in typical Abercrombie fashion, the story focuses on the so-called heroes in the war, but these heroes are definitely not shining role models, and that is what I loved so much about the story. Abercrombie, he does not glorify war. In contrary, while the characters in this book keep talking about the glory, we readers get insight into how little glory there is actually in war. And the heroes we look up to are deeply flawed and are actually not people we should be looking up to. There is this one specific character that I won't mention due to spoiler reasons, but this person basically goes to war for the first time, and this person has always dreamt of gaining a name for himself in war. However, in some really twisted events, this character ends up killing his own friend when no one is looking, and when the band arrives, they believe he has fought bravely and survived a fierce attack, and he thereby gains a name for himself. This character, he's a hero in everyone's eyes, but in reality he is a fraud, and Abercrombie again and again shows us how flawed, cynical and selfish we human beings often are. Also, while the story itself is depressing and grim, what really keeps the story interesting and engaging is the humor. Abercrombie has a unique ability to make these extremely grim and depressing stories really funny and thought-provoking. Also, Abercrombie is probably one of the best examples of modern fantasy writing. It's actually quite astounding how little exposition there is in the first law books. These stories are mainly dialogue and very little descriptions, and while it's difficult to write a book with so few descriptions, Abercrombie, he just pulls it off. The main reason why Abercrombie is able to pull this off is because his characterizations are top notch. It's actually quite mind-blowing how well Abercrombie is able to differentiate between these characters by dialogue only. You can almost just open a random first law book, read a sentence, and you will just know who is speaking just by reading that one sentence. The characters in this world have such a unique tone that really makes it so easy to differentiate between the characters, which is simply astounding. And that is why I really think that Abercrombie is one of the best in the fantasy genre out there. There is no one in the genre that writes like Abercrombie. I sometimes get questions where people ask, like, who writes like Abercrombie? And I truly do not know what to say. There are many authors who write grimdark books, but very, very few, actually none that I've discovered, are able to write dialogue and characters like Abercrombie. He is truly one of a kind. But if you don't enjoy grim books with bad language and that are very cynical and dark in tone, then this probably won't be for you. The first law is very cynical and grim and will definitely not appeal to everyone's taste. But I loved the heroes. This was such a huge surprise, and it gets a well-deserved 5 out of 5 stars from me. I can't wait to read Red Country soon. So that is it. Have you pre-ordered the first binding? Have you read the heroes? Definitely let me know in the comments down below. And thank you so much for watching.